Welcome to the Continuum Lab. In this video, I'm going to show you how I helped a group from across the Atlantic Ocean to make the largest instrument that I've ever worked on. Now, as you might have seen, the instruments that I make tend to be kind of small, simple, and basically made from whatever I have on hand. This instrument is none of those things. I am not exaggerating when I say that I could literally fit my whole body inside this instrument 6 times over. And we're talking about a professional instrument here, not like the prototype instruments that I like to make here in the lab. This one is a mission critical part of a traveling show which will be touring the United States this summer. So okay, enough beating around the bush. You've seen the instrument in the thumbnail already, so let me tell you the story of my collaboration with Squonk and how I helped them to make the Brouhaha Bellows. First, I'll quickly tell you how the project came to be, and then I'll get into some technical detail. I'll also tell you how the first version failed miserably and why, and then I'll tell you how the second and final version actually works. Anyway, it all started with an email. I have a contact form over on the continuumlab.com homepage, and I get a surprising amount of emails from people who've seen my videos and now they need my help with some kind of electronic musical instrument project. Now, most people are just asking for basic advice and some detail, and that's totally fine. I'm happy to help. But some others are trying to develop fully custom, original instruments, and they need my help to do it. The problem is, most of them lack the 2 basic ingredients to catch my interest for a project like this. Number 1, a really interesting project, and number 2, a budget. Now, the email I'm talking about here didn't fall into any of those categories. It was from a group called Squonk, and it went something like this. Hi, we're Squonk. We have a stage show and we're trying to make an instrument using humongous bellows, which will be played by the audience and which will make a really loud foghorn sound. We tried to make it work acoustically by having the air pressure from the bellows produce sound directly, but it's not working. Do you think you could help us to make an electronic solution to incorporate into the instrument? We will pay you for your time and expertise. So yeah, that honestly sounded really interesting. The first thing I did, of course, was to go online to check these people out. And I immediately realized that they were quite serious about making large instruments, and that they were also possibly a little bit mad in the best possible way. So we communicated back and forth for a bit, talking about measurements, materials, budgets, possible solutions. They had seen my wind instruments here on the channel, and the initial idea was to use something like that, connected directly to the large air cylinder that was already installed into each bellows. Now, you might have seen my breath sensor designs here on the channel. They all use the same technique. A membrane made from a balloon will expand when you blow into the instrument, and an optical sensor will then measure that expansion. But I was worried about what kind of pressure and airflow the air cylinder in the bellows would produce, and also about the necessary calibration and maintenance of this kind of system. That would mean that the technical staff from Squonk would have to get comfortable with stuff like airflow regulation and membrane tension or even replacement. So I managed to convince the good people of Squonk to go with a completely different solution, which would ignore airflow and pressure, and instead use ultrasonic distance sensors to measure the internal distance between the upper and lower part of the bellows and produce the signal from that. This, in hindsight, was a stupid idea, but we'll get back to that. My thinking went like this. No mechanical parts equals no wear and tear equals no maintenance, plus no air pressure equals no calibration. Solve for X, better solution all round. Now, as I started putting together the prototype, I did run into some issues with sensor noise. Sometimes my crude cardboard bellows would be a bit unstable. There were several problems, like I had to carefully isolate one sensor from the ones next to it to avoid cross-activation. I mean, ultrasound sensors literally use sound waves, which tend to naturally bounce around a lot. And of course, the top section of bellows had to be quite stable, because otherwise the sensor would activate with each little bounce. Anyway, the final code included some heavy filtering of the sensor readings just to get over those 2 problems. Now, time was a factor because they were already in rehearsals at the time and getting ready for a first show. So I went straight for functionality, skipping aesthetics completely, which is how I like to work anyway. So of course I managed to get everything working finally, and after talking to Squonk and sending them some test video, I shipped everything off. So while the package was underway, I worked on the synth side of the project, which presented me with a whole different set of issues. So, slight tangent, bear with me. This instrument works with MIDI, which is of course universal and easy to use. But there's a slight hiccup, because in this case, each of the 6 bellows needs separate and continuous volume control, like the kind you get from a MIDI wind instrument, so that you can pull harder or softer on each string and adjust the volume whenever you want, even mid-note. That's why each bellows is a separate controller communicating on a separate MIDI channel, because it's the easiest way to have multiple CC2 MIDI breath controls not interfere with each other. So that part was fine, but now I had to help Squonk set up their computer to work with that set of constraints. And of course they would be using a MacBook, while here in the lab I only use Linux and Windows. There were a lot of emails back and forth, especially trying to figure out a good foghorn synth that would work on their system, but eventually we got everything figured out. The final solution uses a custom patch in the Helm synth, which then runs as 6 individual VST plugins in a DAW. So that pretty much sums up the software and synth side of the thing. But about a week later, when the package arrived on Squonk's doorstep, we quickly realized that the hardware side of the project wasn't quite resolved yet. The technical crew from Squonk quickly set up the electronics inside the bellows and started testing, and they immediately found that the signal was super noisy. We tried to figure out what was causing this. It might have been some wobble in the sensors during the more action-packed parts of the Squonk show, or it could be that the actual shape of the inside of the bellows, which had a bunch of folds in the material, was causing additional echoes from the ultrasound to reach the sensor. We never fully solved the mystery. Maybe if I'd actually been there with the instrument, I would have been able to experiment and fiddle with it to achieve complete stability. But I live in Spain and I wasn't able to solve these problems from across the Atlantic. So rather than waste more precious time on this unstable setup, we decided to go back to the drawing board to implement what the guys from Squonk had initially asked me for, which was an actual air pressure sensor. Now, if you remember, I said a moment ago that I had some concerns about this solution because it would require caring for and calibrating the balloon membranes. But on the other hand, given the kind of problems we were having with the ultrasound-based setup, the pressure sensors promised much better stability, plus the ability to mechanically calibrate the sensors once they were actually installed in the instrument by tensioning or loosening the membrane, or even enlarging the air exit hole. So it seemed really clear that this was the way forward, and I immediately got to work on the new setup. Now, my air pressure sensors are actually really simple, and I use them for all of the wind instruments that I make here in the Continuum lab. The way they work is, I make a pressure chamber from the top of a plastic water bottle, and then I cover the open end with a membrane made from a balloon. Then I blow air into the chamber through a small hole in the lid, and that makes the membrane expand. I then place a CNY70 optical sensor in front of the membrane, and that gives me an analog signal depending on the distance to the membrane, so I can tell when it expands and how much. There's also a small exit hole to allow for continuous airflow. In this case, I tried to make the sensors specifically for the air cylinders in the bellows, which meant getting the right thickness of silicone tube for the interface and adjusting the membrane tension and air exit hole for the specific airflow and pressure needed. So at this point we had wasted weeks on the first version, and now it was crunch time. I was working feverishly to get the new sensors done and shipped, while Squonk was preparing to do their first shows with the actual bellows. So again, I skipped aesthetics completely, went straight for functionality, and I managed to get the new sensors done in just a couple of days, and then I shipped them out. The sensors arrived a couple of days later, and as soon as the technical crew from Squonk got them installed in the bellows, it immediately became clear that we had found the right solution. Everything worked and appeared perfectly stable, with no sensor noise and good sensitivity. And that was it. The project was done, and I was proud to find my name on the official list of participants on the Squonk website. I have to say, I'm blown away both by the professionality and dedication of everyone else on this list, and by the audacity of the Squonk project itself and how thoroughly crazy their shows are in terms of stage infrastructure, machines, and showmanship. Is there a moral to this story? Well, maybe if someone asks you to make something that you know exactly how to do, something that will obviously work great for exactly what they need, then maybe don't try to convince them to do something completely different which might or might not work at all. Anyway, it was a pleasure and an honor to work with Squonk. If you're interested in knowing more about them, then check them out over at squonk.org. And if you're in the United States, then you might be able to catch one of their shows this summer. And you might even be able to play one of the fantastic bellows yourself.
Pretty fast, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Very good. Now, are you ready? Okay, let's bring it back up, band.
If you're a regular here on the Continuum Lab YouTube channel, then you might or might not have noticed that I've been absent from this channel for more than a year now. The Squonk Bellows is just one of the many projects I've been working on during this time. Most of the projects have nothing to do with musical instruments, and so they have no place here in the Continuum Lab. But there is at least one very cool project that I'll be sharing with you over the coming time. However, the main project here in the lab is the Continuum Lab instrument kit. I'm currently working on the Click version 3. Now, so many of you have written to me asking basically one of two questions. Will the Click 2 be coming back in stock? And or will there be a new version of the Click? And the answers to those two questions are no and yes. The Click 2 is old news. The teensy microcontroller that I was using is going out of stock. It's too expensive. Forget about it. The Click 3, however, is based on the ESP32 microcontroller. It has new capabilities, there are new instruments, new synths. It's going to be more awesome than version 2 in every single way. So stay tuned here to the channel for more news on that. And that's it. Take care until next time, and I'll see you in the Continuum.